is John Moore, and I want to report on research which is being done with my two collaborators over here at PhD from Princeton and Shenjing Zhang. You may notice here it says Shenjing is at the London School of Economics. Yesterday, the sharp-eyed among you will have noticed that he works at Peking University. The truth is, he works at both. And we're all waiting with bated breath to see which one he finally chooses to stay. To recap, if I may, for those people who weren't here yesterday, the research questions, you'll recognize this slide from yesterday, start with the observation that when entrepreneurs, I'm going to talk about engineers for the rest of the afternoon, and in fact, like yesterday, I'm going to be, if I may, the engineer. When I turn to you as deep pockets of data investment, and since today is well, I don't know whether to use yesterday or today as a chronological reasons logic. I tell you, since today is Friday, let's say it's today, Friday. So today, on Friday, I come to you to borrow money, or to raise funds from you. I shouldn't use the language of borrowing, because raising funds could be in the form of all sorts of things, and most generically, either debt or equity. Now, the project which I'm going to undertake is a long-term one, so it's going to continue tomorrow, Saturday, the next day, Sunday, and so on. Our starting point is a stylized fact that may or may not be true, which is that you, on Friday today, ex ante, as we call it, the data investment, have relatively short horizon vis-a-vis my investment project. So although the project's long-term, you don't look that far into the future when you're assessing how much you're willing to lend me, or to, sorry, I used the word lend again, I apologize. How many funds you're willing to disgorge on Friday today. Now the stylized facts, where do they come from? As I said yesterday, there's an influential paper by Diana Murray, the QJ 2021, which studies the nature of borrowing, and here the focus is on debt. And one of the intriguing points that they discover is that the ratio, which is typically built into a debt contract in the form of covenant, putting a ceiling on the amount that I can ultimately ever raise against this project, a ceiling of some multiple of my earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, EBITDA. And that multiple is between 3 and 4.5. And we take that as a low number, a low multiple, and we take that as evidence to suggest that, in fact, your horizon is relatively short. When it comes to equity, I think it's fair to say the jury is still out, but there's certainly one school of thought and some influential research to suggest that there too, investors take a shorter horizon than the length of the project. Now, since my talk yesterday, Petra, where are you, Petra? Petra in particular came up to me and said, well, hang on a minute, there are some other much more natural explanations for this short-term horizon phenomenon that you've described, other than the one that I gave to you yesterday. Namely, first of all, that there's a ton of uncertainty associated with this project of mine, and most projects, and who knows what's going to happen from years 6 onwards. And so little wonder you take very little notice of the tail of the return flow. My reply to that is, and I should have perhaps said this yesterday, my reply to that is that, of course, I'm just one of many entrepreneurs that you can finance. And whatever idiosyncratic risk there is associated with my project could be pooled across all the other people who are raising funds. So idiosyncratic risk in principle can be diversified. And that, therefore, we argue, is not an argument for why investors, you, might take a short-term, have a short-term horizon. When it comes to other kinds of risk that might be, rehearsing the discussion which I had with Petra earlier today, and when it comes to other kinds of risk that might be not so easily diversified, such as macroeconomic risk, well, for those of you who've done advanced macro, we have such a thing as the stochastic discount factor, and that embodies attitudes to macroeconomic and non-diversifiable risk, and that would be the appropriate discount factor that you will use in terms of assessing my flow. But there's no reason why that should be truncated at 5, whatever small number it is that I have in mind. That goes on into the future too. So although some risk, macroeconomic risk, cannot be diversified, I don't think that's a compelling argument for your short-term horizon. Now the other argument that Petra put to me is a more modern argument, which is present bias. That is a psychological thing that you suffer from when you are, I shouldn't accuse you of suffering from bias, but it is argued that deep pockets suffer present bias, and therefore little wonder that they take only the near term into account. Now, that may be true. I'm not an expert on modern departures from full rationality in any shape or form, and I don't want to belittle it as an explanation. It may be true, it may be that that's all one needs to be imported into a macroeconomic framework that I'm going to be talking about today in order to make progress. I simply want to suggest that more old-fashioned explanations, dare I call them that, and the one I put forward to you yesterday was a very old-fashioned explanation. It's called moral hazard. Very naked realization on your part that I can fool around tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and it's that fooling around that really makes you nervous about the future. So obviously moral hazard is something which is now part and parcel of standard like economic thinking, has perhaps an older tradition than present bias does. But so present bias, some psychological explanation for short-termism is not off the table in any way, but I'd like to not have to rely on it, if I may. And I'd like to go back to relying instead on my theory from yesterday. So, I guess I've just been talking about the penultimate sentence on this overhead. Why are horizons short? Well, I'll just give you a menu of possibilities. The one I'd like to rely on is yesterday's explanation. And then now we come to today, which is how do funding horizons, the fact that your funding horizons might be relatively short-term, interact with growth and business cycles. So what we are about today is to construct a macroeconomic model which has at its heart this phenomenon of what I called yesterday the green line, if you remember the green line, that descending line which reflected your attitude to the future. Now when it comes to constructing a macroeconomic model, we both have to be careful in terms of choosing functional forms and a certain degree of cleverness in enabling the whole thing to be fitted together like a jigsaw. You can get away with fewer, you can cut fewer corners. On the other hand, sometimes it sort of feels less satisfactory. So I leave you to decide whether you prefer yesterday's model to today's. And forgive me, if I may, for, in a way, repeating myself, because the economics, the deep economics of today are quite similar to yesterday. And in particular, you'll recognize this first point here, which is that, well, first of all, I'm going to be interested to know what role changes in interest rates have on the behavior of the economy, both its level and its growth. To that end, then, I want a parameter which I can look at comparative statics and that's going to be capital R. So in order to not have to take, this is one of the corners of that money, in order not to have to worry too much about the whole closure of a model via a central bank and all that, I'm just going to say that this is a small economy that I'm looking at, please, and there's a thing called the world interest rate, capital R, and everything that I say today is in real terms. So I'm sweeping aside the whole New Keynesian framework and nominal rigidities of any economy. Which is not to say that this couldn't, in principle, what I take there, be fitted into a more closed economy, New Keynesian world. So in that context, there's a single homogeneous good which is going to serve both for consumption and investment purposes at each date. So it's, again, not unlike the New Keynesian model where there's a proliferation of varieties, it's an monopolistic competition. This is much more plain vanilla. There's a single good. And the utility function of agents in my economy is a classic discounted sum of logarithm of consumption. So beta there is I think it's true that all Greek letters in this talk will be parameters that lie between 0 and 1. So beta is true form, it's the discount, subjective discount rate. The logarithm is very helpful analytically for reasons that I'll come on to later when we start trying to figure out consumption, choice of consumption. So CT at the moment is just sitting there as the consumption at day T. Now each agent in this economy sometimes has an investment opportunity. That is to say they are, quote, an entrepreneur or an engineer. And sometimes not. That is to say they are a deep pocket. Not so deep, because you have to sort of fully endogenize wealth and what have you. So sometimes, as it were, you're up here on the stage trying to raise funds, and sometimes you're down there lending or providing funds. And in order to fit this part of the model, I'm not going to be explicit about that directly, but I'd like you to have it in your minds that there is a migration process going on in role play. So every day we wake up individually and discover whether we're an entrepreneur or a sailor today. And I'll explain, I hope carefully, what that means. But that's something which you can't control. The Markov process, which it is a Markov process, which determines the flows in both directions, is think of it as a slow-moving Markov process. So there's a lot of stickiness here. So I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm likely to be an entrepreneur for a while before I switch to being a saver, and then I'll be a saver for a while before I move back to being an entrepreneur. So all that richness, all that fine detail of the model is buried behind the scenes, but we need that in order to get a handle, an explicit handle, on everybody's wealth positions and net worth. Okay. Now, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Now, this is definitely lifted from yesterday. You'll see at the bottom of this slide here. So at each date, if you are an entrepreneur, then you have, actually this isn't quite the same as yesterday, but this is an important new feature here. This is what's known as a Leontief production function. It has constant returns to scale. So what you see in front of you is per unit of plant. And the way to produce plant, so today being Friday, if I'm an engineer, I put in X goods at one building in fixed proportions. And think of literally screwing equipment into the building to create a plant that's working. So that is a physical output capital. And you'll recognize all that from yesterday. And the productivity of this capital on Saturday morning, the first date, after to, well, I don't know, it achieves quite a few things. But could you, let me tell you what it is. You've done whether you like it or not. I'm going to borrow from a paper, an old paper by Kenneth Arrow, published in 1962, on learning by investment. Now, you may have come across the phrase learning by doing, which is where economists assume that people learn and their skill set improves by virtue of producing things or doing something. Well, here the doing is investing. So this is learning by investing. Capital E, acquire what I'm calling a tool per unit of investment. And that's the word tool here is a shorthand for one more unit of my human capital. So my human capital is augmented through the investment process. It's a skill, a capability, which is enlarged. And it's not just any old tool, it's an E-tool, because remember my name is E. So this is a tool specific to me. This is not something which is trainable. It's human capital. Remember I talked about inalienability of human capital yesterday. The shades of that here too. So this skill is really mine. Now, can I just get off my chest one thing which I was going to spoke to later, but I think maybe this is a natural moment to say it. You might immediately think, well, if you've got this tool as part of your human capital, and then it's several tools, a stock of tools, John, engineer, let's call me Mr. Engineer. If you have a stock of tools, Mr. Engineer, and then suddenly, in that Markov migration process I told you about a few minutes ago, you wake up one morning and discover that you are no longer an engineer, then what happens to that stock of tools in terms of the economy? This is a modeling device that I'm wanting to bare my soul about here. So we have to take a position on that. We could have said, well, when you, as it were, retire temporarily maybe from being an engineer, you lose your human capital. If you ever become an engineer again, which you will, through that Markov process, you have to start again from scratch. That was one way of modeling things. We decided to go something slightly different, which is that when I retire, as it were, become a saver, an old engineer, I can teach some newcomer, maybe you, where's Max? I have a friend here called Max. Where's Max? My third year undergraduate friend called Max. He must be here. Max. I was going to say something nice about you. There you are, Max. Max. Okay, I don't stand up, I'm going to say something nice about you. Max. Round of applause for Max. Okay. So Max was a slave to this last night, yesterday, but he woke up this morning and discovered he was an engineer. God was good to him. God was bad to me. I became a saver today. I've got my stock now I've got my stock of tools. What I could do is to sell them to Max and teach them to it. So this is some sort of intermediate ground between inalienability and perfect salability. I have the skill to teach Max how to use my tools, and there's no sort of loss in that teaching process, I suppose. But what I can't do is sell you my tools up front. Suppose. You can ask a question.
Are you going to be taught back when you come back to this state?
Yes, I can be taught back. Yeah. All right, and that was just a little side loop that I wanted to just divulge. Enough? So that's tools for you. Now the production of these two things is in fixed relationship, the one-to-one. So that's, again, a modeling device, but I'd like you to bear in mind that the entry of plants and tools into the macroeconomy, into the aggregate economy, is in fixed one-to-one proportions. It doesn't have to be. It's kind of interesting to think about cases where it's not, but for today, could I stick with this one-to-one ratio? Now, I would like to, and remember the idea from yesterday, please. I have a trade-off between size versus fundraising. On the one hand, I'd like to raise as few funds as possible so that I don't have to share the goodies with you in the future. And I don't keep them all to myself. On the other hand, I want to raise many funds as possible in order to be able to invest as much as possible, to have as big a plant as possible. Or in my case, actually, to have as many tools as I can. So my main old goal in life, on Friday when I'm investing, is to acquire more tools, because tools are going to be the channel through which I will earn wages and earn my livelihood. So it's the acquisition of tools which is uppermost in my mind when I'm deciding to scale the investment. Now, in the race between those two wishes, not to raise funds versus raising funds, the latter wins, because the productivity of the technology that I've just shown you is inherently greater than capital R. So this is a constant returns, strictly positive NPV relative to our project, which in Edinburgh terms would mean that I should like to shoot off to infinity. But I can't because I'm limited by the scale of funding that I can succeed with. And that's my greatest scale up. Now, to scale up, the best way to do it is to commit as much of the output to you per unit as I can. I cannot, by assumption, commit my labour. We've talked about that. But I can sell everything else to you. And the only other thing on the table to sell is the plant. So I do. So just like yesterday, you become the plant owner, and at that point, you are, what have you got? You've got a building, you've got a machine in it, it's going to need to be maintained, and meantime back in the branch, there's me with my tool, which is going to be, as you'll see in a second, useful for maintaining it. Now yesterday, when I was talking about my N little Johns, and you, the plant owner, it was a bargaining game. You needed our human capital, what is today I'm calling tools, in order to keep the productivity of the plant up. The same is true today, but I'm not going to assume that you and I are locked in with each other. And I want to thank Max for talking to me at the end of yesterday's lecture, coming right up to me and asking the bullseye question, which was, why is it, I hope you were talking about the real world. He said, look, in reality, once a piece of plant has been established and is up and running, you don't necessarily have to rely on the initial scientists to keep it going. That's the sort of nature of technology. And I totally agree with you. So I want to swing to the exact opposite world now, where there's perfect competition on Saturday for people with tools. Now, there's you with your plant, and there's someone else, another personal deep pocket with their plant, who are buying specialist labour in the form of engineers with their tools, and there's a whole ton of people like me with my tools. And there's a competitive labour market which clears. And so no arguing, this is a classic competitive world. Edinburgh, in fact. I hope that you know what I mean by Edinburgh. So with all the theorems of welfare economics skip in at this point, and you think, oh, this is going to be a first best economy. Well, you should be thinking that. Now, the thing is, I cannot, this is the major assumption for this afternoon, I cannot commit on Friday at the date of investment to work for you at less than the ex-post wage. So if the Saturday wage is whatever it is, W, I know that I'm a free agent on Saturday, and I can go and work for anybody like you and maintain their plant for them. And wherever you know that. Now, I would like to say to you on Friday, look, Max, actually no, Max, you're another engineer, but anyway, Petra, look, Petra, I will work for departure from Edinburgh, I am assuming I cannot write a contract of that form. I cannot commit not to participate in the ex-post labour market. Which actually, when you say it, sounds incredibly mild restriction. That since I have a certain human capital here, which is valuable to society, surely I should be able to sell it. And yes, indeed, I'm assuming I can sell it, no impediments. But therein is a restriction. That's called sometimes in the literature the non-exclusivity constraint, and it means that I cannot exclude myself from a forward market, from a market that's going to happen in the future. And that non-exclusivity constraint, my inability to commit to Petra to work for less than the ex-post W, is the single departure from Edinburgh. And everything that I'm talking about today will, the equilibrium that I'm going to unfold, is less. There's less output, there's less investment, there's less consumption. It's all below what would happen in a so-called first best allocation or an Edinburgh equilibrium. Now, what about you, if I may? There's more to get off my chest here, I'm afraid. So this next bit is different from yesterday. At each date, so think Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and think yourself, the owner of the plant, you, well, if I may, Petra, okay? The Petra wakes up with a plant of productivity Z, suppose, per unit. Now remember, Z on Saturday morning is 1, but that's a normalization. A brand new plant has a productivity 1. But very much part of this model will be a sort of plant-level evolution of productivity. So Z can go up and it can go down freely, and it's going to be in Petra's, under Petra's control. And the technology for doing this is that at any date, let's say tomorrow, Saturday, Petra can, with a product, actually, let's not say Saturday, because you know Z is even on Saturday. I don't know, next Monday. On Monday morning, suppose the productivity is there. Now, she can hire in this ex-post labour market any number of tools, that is, the engineer's expertise, to produce goods and to maintain plant productivity. And here's the technology, that if she has a per unit, it's all constant returns again, per unit of plant which has productivity Z, if she threw in to the melting pot, so to speak, H tools, and so hired H engineers, or H, they don't have to be the same engineer with H tools, it could be H different engineers, each with one tool, it doesn't matter. What is the role of those engineers? Well, it doesn't directly affect output. So the output on this Monday morning that will go directly to Petra is A times Z. But that's the meaning of productivity. It's when you say productivity Z, it's through just A times Z. Where the H kicks in, though, is Tuesday's productivity. So Tuesday's productivity on this piece of plant, which let's call Z prime here, is a little function, a little Cobb-Douglas function of Monday's productivity Z raised to the power theta times H, the number of tools that she hires, raised to the power eta. And theta plus eta is less than or equal to 1. So this is a Cobb-Douglas production function which maps, let's say, Monday morning's productivity Z into Tuesday morning's productivity. Now this is an example, again, of the roundaboutness, this Austrian school of technology that I talked about yesterday, where the role of the scientists, the engineers, is to maintain productivity. Now, Petra can put her foot on the gas, the owner can put her foot on the gas and hire more H, which would of course mean probably that Tuesday's Z prime is going to be bigger than Monday's Z. That's her free choice. She, on the other hand, can take her foot off the gas and save wage bill, W times H. But the downside would be that on Tuesday Z prime would be lower. Again, now for macro reasons, it's it's useful to build in some depreciation here. Because, for macro reasons, we want the existing plant to be perhaps slowly shrinking, and then new investment comes in, and we look for steady state of the whole system. So we'll assume that lambda, per unit of plant, only lambda that survives to Tuesday morning. So 1 minus lambda is the rate of depreciation, and the productivity of that plant is Z prime, that I've just been talking about. And meantime, there's also some depreciation going on in terms of my human capital. That too, let us say, depreciates by a factor of 1 minus lambda. Now, remember the initial Friday investment had this one-to-one property, that the ratio of plant to tools was skewed out in fixed proportion 1-to-1. Since the depreciation rate is common, lambda, this is a modeling device again. Since the depreciation rate is common across tools and plant, the ongoing numbers of plant and tools in aggregate will stay in 1-to-1 fixed proportion. So we're going to be looking for market clearing through that. It would change things if we made those two lambdas different from each other. Okay, now the next bit is a dirty business. I'm just going to assume that foreigners supply buildings. So the reason is because I don't want to have to, when it comes to sort of national income accounting, have to worry about the foreigners and their profits and their utility. So it's so much easier to file all that offshore and say that the foreigners supply buildings into the system. And this is very similar to yesterday. Buildings, by the way, let's say, also depreciate at the rate of lambda. Sorry, by a factor of 1 minus lambda. And they deliver a flow return of little f that you'll remember from yesterday. And so therefore the price of the building, the supply price, is perfectly elastic at Q equal to f over r minus lambda. So that's the formula you get when you sum up f over r plus lambda f over r squared plus lambda squared f over r cubed, etc. When you sum up that, you come up with the perfectly elastic supply price of buildings given by Q. And Q, lambda is not too far below 1, so Q is highly sensitive to R. And indeed, as we have in recent years, entered these areas of very low real interest rates, it's super sensitive to R. And not only is Q big when R is close to 1, but Q is particularly sensitive to movements in R, if you think about it. All right, I think I've now finished talking about the model. Here's, we need to analyze it. So the plant owner, you always has the option to stop and liquidate and turn his plant back, or her plant and his back into a generic building. So her value of a unit of plant productivity is at the beginning of a period, but again, let's think in terms of next Monday. So V of Z, capital V of Z is the owner's assessment of the discounted value of this unit of plant. The first thing that comes in on the right-hand side is A times Z. That's in the morning. At lunchtime, the owner can liquidate, just sell, and turn the thing back into a building, and that would fetch Q on the building market. Or the owner could decide to continue, in which case she's got this auxiliary question about how to put her foot on the gas, as I put it before. So H is now a choice of the owner on Monday afternoon, and if you go for a higher H, it's going to have a bigger wage bill, WH, which gets subtracted. But the good news would be that on Tuesday morning, Z prime, which remember is that little Cobb Douglas, will be higher, and therefore we'll be hopefully looking at a positive function V of a bigger number, and that will be the offsetting benefit of the cost of hiring more workers. And more tools, I should say. The lambda over R on the outside of V there is because remember everything's been depreciated, and we've got one of the intraday gross interest rate. Now, this turns out to be pretty interesting, we think. is a Melbourne equation. A lot more interesting than yesterday's. Because there's a clear dichotomy that you face on Saturday morning. So remember the timing here. On Friday, we make an investment. On Friday, by the way, we invest with friends. Okay, so I come to you and I say, you give me some money, we'll give you some funding, and you look at my technology and you give me some, and it's all great. On Saturday morning, we wake up and we're the worst of enemies in a way. Because you're the plant owner, you need my labour services, and we're fighting over W. But, thanks to Max, a good example of this is, we think, software engineers in California. So, in California, there's a very vigorous market for these very highly skilled software engineers. Now, at that point, I don't have to work for you, and from your point of view, you don't have to hire me. So at that point, we can part company completely. Anyway, so your problem on Saturday morning, and every morning thereafter, is how to play things in the medium to long run. And the dichotomy is, are you going to be in it forever? Because remember, there's no death in this model. There's shrinkage through labor, but there's no death. So, metaphorically, do you want to be in it for the very long haul, the cultural long haul, or do you want to plan for some liquidation, some termination, at some horizon capital T, which could be 10, 15 years later, days later, periods later. Now, that dichotomous choice will really affect your choice of age, because if you know or decide, it's up to you, if you decide that you are going to get out in 15 periods time, then there's no point in hiring a ton of H's at price W in order to maintain the productivity. Now, of course, you don't want to go berserk and just hire you don't want to be super lazy and hire nobody, because that will be like chucking the technology away. Remember the competitiveness. If H is 0, then Sunday's productivity would be 0. On the other hand, you don't want to be investing too much into the long-term future because you know that you're planning to shut down. So could you please have that in your minds, that the solution to this Darwin equation has a very intriguing, I keep using the word dichotomy, between staying in or quitting. But if you are going to quit, you do it slowly. Grealish has talked about firms living under the shadow of death. So if you're going to die, you die slowly, but you die rationally. And so you don't maintain productivity. You might let your Z slowly fall. You're earning money during those 15 years, but you're not overdoing it in terms of maintenance. And then, okay, so that's your Saturday morning problem, which is quite complicated, quite subtle, I should say. And you have to work that all out. And the solution is going to become, let's call V of 1 down here on the right-hand side. So remember, 1 is the normalized productivity from Saturday morning, the new plan, discounted by whatever our back to Friday. That's the amount, little b, which you're willing to lend me per unit, or there's the funding that you're willing to provide per unit. Okay, now the budget constraint of an agent in this model, at any particular day, T, who has HT tools and DT financial assets, looks like this. Output is, or in outgoings are consumption, CT, plus new investment, if you are lucky enough to be an engineer. So IT is 0 if you're a sailor. But if you're an engineer like me, then the unit cost, the gross unit cost of investment is X. Remember, X is one of the two inputs in the investment technology, the other being a building, which is going to be priced at Q. So X plus Q is going to be the gross unit cost, minus B, which is the fundraising capacity that I just talked about, that's 1 over R times capital V of 1. All of that bracket, which is something you'll remember from yesterday's the famous denominator, that is my net unit cost. It's like a fully levered unit cost of investment. I may choose to hold financial assets, D. Now, to give the game away, I won't do that if I'm an engineer today. Because holding financial assets yields R, whereas investing yields more than R. That's the whole point about this investment technology. It has a superior return. So dt plus 1 will be 0 if you're an engineer. If you're a saver, it's exactly the other way around. IT will be 0 because you're just unlucky enough not to be able to. You don't have access to this superior technology, and you have to put everything into dt plus 1. What is dt? dt is a combination of two things. One is, in principle, and they're perfectly substitutable for as far as you're concerned. It's either buying a plant, which is what I spend most of the time now talking about. That's your method of investing in financial assets. So buying a plant, you think of as just buying a piece of paper, in effect. Or possibly buying a bond on the international market. Remember, this is an open economy with a bond market with a sort of parametrically taken price of capital R. Now, how are you? Well, that is a generic left-hand side, and somehow captured in one left-hand side, both me and you. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a generic right-hand side. Well, it depends on what kind of person we were yesterday. If yesterday I was an engineer, and remember, this is the Markov migration process. Just because I'm an engineer today doesn't mean I was an engineer yesterday. But if I was an engineer yesterday, then HT, this morning's stock of tools will be strictly positive, and I'll be able to earn the W from that. And that's what I was saying earlier, that my whole motivation for investing is to earn the sequence of W's. So if HT is positive, it means I was an engineer yesterday. If I was a saver yesterday, it must be 0. And then DT, well, is that positive or not? It depends whether I was a saver yesterday. Endogenously, if I was a saver yesterday, the DT will be positive. And if I was an engineer yesterday, I would have chosen it not to be positive. I would have chosen it to be 0. And then the evolution of H is exactly what you think it means. That if I were an engineer both yesterday and today, so Thursday and Friday, then by the end of on Saturday morning, my HT plus 1 will be given by the depreciated lambda HT plus the IT investment that I made on Friday. And we can rewrite this budget constraint in sort of gross terms, in stock rather than flow terms. And I think this is possibly a more useful way to do it, which is that on the left-hand side we have consumption plus the cost of acquiring HT plus 1 units of tools tomorrow. And one route through by which I can acquire those tools is straightforward x plus q minus d. Plus the dt plus 1 over r, so no change there. So notice what's happened between the top of this slide and the bottom is I switched from IT to HT plus 1, so we're going to be talking about stock now of tools. And then that's paid for by my net worth. This thing called MT on the bottom right here. MT is given by the value of the, well, let's start on the right here. It's the value of the financial assets, which, as I said, come in the two varieties, either ownership of plant or internationally traded bonds, or in the form of HT, which of course must be 0 if I was a saver yesterday. If I was an engineer yesterday, then that HT will be strictly positive. And what does HT deliver for me? A flow of W plus the depreciated shadow value of H, which is per unit, which is the famous round bracket, the denominator. Now, inside that equation, migration. So if I retire today and sell my tools to Max, who's an incoming engineer, you, Max, can either acquire tools by doing brand new investment, or you can buy second-hand tools from me on the second-hand tools market, where I teach you how to use my tools. You're indifferent between those two things, and the price of second-hand tools will equal the opportunity cost of making them, which is the famous round bracket. So, so that's sort of buried behind this rather simple-looking flow of funds constraint. Now, the rate of return on investment, given particularly what I just showed you, this ratio here, on the top line we've got the flow, this is the ex-post return to alcoholic tools. W, the wage per unit of tool, plus the capital value, the shadow value of tools, which is depreciated times X plus Q minus B. I mean, think of me, so I could in Crystal sell all my tools to Max, and then buy some more tools and then have second-hand market value. And it'll be tomorrow morning's gross return from tools is the flow plus the capital value, depreciated capital value. All that is the numerator, and then in the denominator is, Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that's the unit cost of investment. That ratio we're taking to be, in other words, we're assuming that we're part of the parameter space, but that ratio strictly exceeds R. So that's that verification, if you like, of my starting point, which is that this technology is indeed efficient relative to the background of investment. Now, we've done enough hard work now to be able to go straight to the answer. I, as an engineer, well, in fact, that's true whether I'm an engineer or a saver, I always consume a fraction 1 minus beta of my net worth. And that beautiful fact comes from the logarithm in the consumption function. A discounted sum of logarithmic consumption is tantamount to some ginormous Douglas utility function when you put a certain fixed fraction into each good. And so today's consumption is just like one entry in my sequence of consumptions. And I always put a fixed fraction of my net worth into it. So if my net worth N, the thing I introduced on the previous slide, is whatever it is, I put in 1 minus beta of it into consumption. So that's an extraordinarily helpful analytical maneuver. And it's only true of logarithms. So if you're into all these things, can I introduce you to it? And you and I both decide to consume according to 1 minus beta times our net worth. So the middle two equations of this. Yeah, CT is equal to 1 minus beta times NT. For me, these two equations are mine as an engineer, and these bottom two equations are yours. And for both you and I, we consume a fraction 1 minus beta of our net worth. Now, I'm an engineer, so I hold all my assets in the form of tools. So HT plus 1 is going to be my stock of tools tomorrow morning, and the price, or the shadow price of tools, is the famous round bracket. And that's going to be and I spend all my residual net worth on that. So beta times NT is paying for that. You, on the other hand, don't have the luxury of buying tools because you're a saver, and so you have to put all of your residual net worth, beta times NT, into buying assets. And the assets come in these two varieties of either being a plant owner or buying internationally traded bonds. So a steady state, and we finally assembled the model. A steady state equilibrium of our model is characterized by a wage rate and a new part price, W and D respectively. Various quantity choices, C, D, H, Z, Y. So that's consumption, portfolio choice on the part of savers, H, that's the tool holdings choice on the part of I'm not sure this thing should be in that list. So C, D, and certainly Z and Y are going to be your choices, and C, H, and I will be my choices. Such that all the markets clear. Thank you. they, we, yes, clarify, I mean, the three of us. There are many ways of starting to analyze an equilibrium. We've found over the years to be a good way is to think, how the hell this actually works, and then make a guess, and then see if we can check that everybody's first and second order conditions are satisfied. So that's now what we're in the process of doing, and what I'm doing in front of you. And it turns out that we didn't know any of this before we started, that the parameter space can be divided into two halves. One is this proposition, one half, if you like, is this proposition, and it's related to the case where F, remember F is this opportunity cost of holding a building, the rental price of a building, where F is not too high. So by F not too high, I'd like you to think in terms of, it means that the liquidation option for a plant owner is not that attractive. Remember Q, the price of a building, is F over R minus lambda. So if F is very high, then Q won't be very high. And therefore the temptation to liquidate won't be very high. And what happens is that you all as plant owners decide to go in for the very long haul. So nobody quits. And because the ratio of tools to plant therefore stays 1-to-1, there's no exit of plant other than through depreciation, but there's no exit of tools other than through the same degree of depreciation. In equilibrium for this market for tools, engineering expertise to clear, that can only be cleared by having H is equal to 1 per plant. But then if H is equal to 1 and Z starts off being equal to 1, then think about Douglas production, Z prime will be equal to 1. Do you agree? Z prime is, Z pretty theta, H to the theta. So if both of the two ingredients are 1, then Z prime will be equal to 1. And Z therefore marches along 1, 1, 1 all the time. And the yield from this project is AAA all the time. So on the face of it, it's a pretty dull economy. But there's some interesting things happening under the rug. I think the last onerous bit of algebra, you'll be pleased to know, but it's an important piece of algebra. The question is, back to Petra and her choice of how many H's to hire. Now you are facing a parametric wage in the market for tools, for engineering expertise, and you can hire as many H's as you like. So what you will do is equate wage to marginal product. My marginal product with my tool. Now, what is my marginal product? It's quite complicated because the first thing one can say about my marginal product, remember the roundabout technology is going to be all important here. The first thing about my marginal product is that via the eta exponent, remember the H to the eta? Let's have a little look at the components up there. You see the production function up there, it says A and N1. H is raised to the power eta here. So the direct impact of hiring 1 more unit of me, my tool, is to raise tomorrow's productivity by the exponent of H, which is eta. So eta times A is my direct contribution to tomorrow's productivity. It's tomorrow's, we discount by R, and we also discount by lambda because of the shrinkage. But that is not the end of my productivity. And my value to you goes further than that. Because if I've jacked up tomorrow's Z a little by eta, then that increased value of Z prime will feed into Z double prime through the same Douglas production function, but now through the first part of it. So as Z prime is higher, that raises Z double prime the day after's, the number of prime is how many days into the future I'm looking, by a factor theta, the exponent of Z in the Douglas. So theta times eta is my marginal product to 2 days' time. But that Z double prime in 2 days' time will Now, the crucial thing about this formula for marginal productivity is it's a forward-looking animal, and that's because of the roundaboutness of the technology. That my maintenance input impacts on your output via my impact on your productivity, but my impact on your productivity has long-run effects through the nature of this technology that we have. It has been, we've only discovered this in the last few years, days I should say, that this same kind of technology has been used by Heckman in analysing the role of schooling. So you take a child starting in nursery class at the age of 3, let's say, who finishes schooling at the age of 18. What is the skill of the child at 18 as a function of all the schooling inputs en route? Heckman and colleagues use this Austrian technology the way that we are, that the 3-year-old's schooling impacts on the 4-year-old's skills, but the 4-year-old's skills impacts on the 5-year-old's skills, the same child all the way through. So what happens at 3 years old perfumes all the way through to 18. And the earlier we are, the more important it is in terms of the end of year 18, age 18 in school. It's the same idea here. Okay, now B, the formula, the crucial formula for B. I'm so sorry. The crucial formula for B, on the face of it, B is crucial because that's how much I can raise on Friday per unit of investment from you. That formula, on the face of it, is very straightforward. It's just the discounted value of A minus W. Discounted by R in the first place, by lambda over R squared for 2 days' time, etc. But W, look at the top of this slide here, W itself is a forward-looking object. So when you substitute W into the formula for B, you get this, the green line from yesterday. And this is the intuition I had from yesterday, that every day I work for you, I get paid my marginal product. It's not a bargaining problem anymore. I'm just paid, it's good old-fashioned competition. I get paid my marginal product. But my marginal product, let's say on Sunday, affects Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. So I'm paid on Sunday for something that's going to deliver on Wednesday. But I'm paid again on Monday for something that's going to deliver on Wednesday. And I'm going to get paid on Tuesday for something that's going to deliver on Wednesday. So the Wednesday cherry has been bitten into several times on pass-on. And the further you are out in the future, the more bites of that cherry has been, the more times that cherry has been bitten into. I'm rehearsing yesterday's intuition. So your short-termism, this is our theory of short-termism, your short-termism is reflected in this algebra. And my share of output rises with the horizon, and your share of the output shrinks with the horizon. So this diagram, I don't need to go at it too slowly, is exactly the same. So yes, it's a totally different world. It's a lot of competition and exposing Californian software engineers moving freely between all the various employers. Quite different from yesterday, but it turns out to be the same deep economics. Part of our motivation for writing both models down was we weren't quite sure what was driving what. And it turns out it doesn't matter what determines W. It could be bargaining, where we're all locked in with each other for the long haul, or it could be this opposite extreme that I'm talking about today, where there's full mobility all the time. So you've seen that diagram before. The next few things I can jump through by simply saying that it looks like this graph is going to cut F at some point. Surely you want to liquidate at that point. Answer, no, you wouldn't, because by the time you reach some future point T prime, there's a new downward sloping curve. I call this the green line for people who were here yesterday, because my figures yesterday had a green line, but today I'm afraid it's black. Anyway, the new black downward sloping line, A prime, B prime, C prime, is like starting from scratch. And the area between those two curved lines are all sunk wages as far as you're concerned. So you don't want to liquidate when we saw this yesterday, when you calculate the net present value of what you effectively own when you buy a project from me, a plant from me, is yes, of course you get the initial returns, that's the grey area, but in effect, you buy a negative return, which is the red area, as well. And just to repeat what I just said, that sounds completely wrong. The economics of that sounds completely fallacious. Why would you buy a negative return asset? Or if it is a negative return asset, then why don't you sell it as soon as it turns red? Well, I just gave you the answer. Ex ante, on Friday, when you're looking at this flow, it looks like a negative return. But by the time I actually get there, it looks positive again. Sorry, not again. It looks positive. And the intuition of this, the reality is, you have been paying me wages, or people like me, wages en route between today and whatever date T prime you're thinking about. And those wages, by the time you reach T prime, are sunk. And so you don't want to speculate at that point. But when you do your ex ante calculations, work out what little b is, or v of 1 times whatever r equals to little b, remember, when you do that calculation, you are in effect looking at the sum of a positive area and a negative area. Now that's the red area. Now when we're now going to play some games with R, when R drops, so let's think always about a fall in interest rate. When R drops, the present value of the red area shoots up. It's right out of the tail. And what's more, it will shoot up a lot when we're getting into sort of the low real interest rate area. So therefore, there seems to be right now scope, looking at this diagram, for the perverse conclusion that when interest rates are lower, you lend me less. Sorry, do I mean that? Am I overstating? I think I wish this wasn't being recorded. I think I screwed up just now. Let me put it more softly. Even though when interest rates are lower, you lend me more, but not much more. Let's put it that way. And now I want to turn back to my housing parallel, which is, as young folks going into the housing market trying to buy something, do you want to live in a world with low interest rates? On the face of it, yes, because low interest rates means you can borrow more. But on the other hand, house prices go up a lot, and in the race between the two, it may be that house prices go up more than the willingness of the building society to lend to you, and you end up being able to afford a smaller house. So it could be worse for borrowers to be living in a low interest rate environment. And it's being driven by this red tape. And I think actually I've just said what I've now put on the slide here. A permanent fall in interest rates could offset all the good things. So there are some good things associated with low interest rates in this model. First of all, W goes up a lot. Incidentally, that may sound wrong, that wages go up when interest rates go down. Is that true, you say? Not at all. It isn't true. The thing is, don't be misled by thinking of wages as it were regular blue-collar wages. These are remunerations to top guys, senior guys. Now, our argument is that those go up when interest rates go down. And there, in this mobility world that I have in mind, it's that W, those W's, not blue-collar W's, but senior executive W's, it's those W's which are the seed corn for investment. So net worth on the top line, even after consumption, certainly goes up when interest rates go down. So that's good news for investment. The fundraising capacity goes up. That's good news. The bad news is the price of buildings goes up. And here's the twist. Given the red area, B goes up less, or can go up less than Q can go up. So the bad news, with leverage here on this negative, the subtraction side of the bottom line up here and the bottom line is faster, rising more than the extent to which B is rising, that can twist the bottom line and cause the bottom line to go up a lot, weirdly. So net borrowing goes down, net of building costs goes down, so B minus B is going down, Q minus B is going up, and because of these things are close to each other, that can easily swamp any good news that's happening in the numerator. So conclusion investment can be curtailed through as a result of long-term interest rates being low. So the point we're making, I guess, is that quantitative easing and playing the Monetary Policy Committee trying to maneuver the yield curve to reduce long-run interest rates to boost the economy could actually have a dark side to it. Episodes. So one episode that Nobu, who's Japanese, has in mind is Japan in the late 80s. There was a property boom, crazy property boom. You know, the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was worth more than the whole of California. People had a great time. They thought this was the beginning of, boom time. Consumption went up, investment in buildings went up. But Japan has stagnated for the last 30 years. Another possible example would be Southern Europe joining the Euro. So when Southern Europe joined the Euro, interest rates, real interest rates fell. Spain, for example, had a huge property boom. Times looked great. Consumption boomed. Investment in housing boomed. Property market went crazy. Now, property is not the driver of growth in this model. The driver of growth is plant and tools. Property is just a means to the end. And if what I've just said is true, that lower interest rates paradoxically can squeeze investment, then the engine of growth is being squeezed. So these diagrams are these are accurate diagrams for a simulated economy. So what we have is what's called an MIT shock. I don't know whether that's meant to be a flattery or a rude remark. Anyway, an MIT shock is a shock that no one ever imagined could happen. So at date 5, along the horizontal axes of these four graphs, there's an MIT shock, where real interest rates fall from, say, 2.5%, and definitely in this simulation, from 2.5% to 1.5%. The initial impact is all good. Investment spikes, consumption spikes, output rises, but the economy finds itself on a lower growth trajectory. And in the medium run, look at how these lines work out, consumption ends up being on a lower, investment up there at the top left ends up being a lower growth path than it would have done had the interest rates stayed at 2.5%. But with a 1.5% interest rate, this is particularly true when R gets close to 1. And the reason is, the intuition I think is that Q is particularly vulnerable to changes in R when R is low. And it's the jagged movements in Q which are the root cause. The bad news here is the rise in Q, building price. All right, so when R is down in these low regions, like 1.5% to 2.5%, these things can happen. And look what's happened in the long run. The economy stagnates, lower investment path and lower consumption path. Now, of course, when you have changes in growth rates, that is a big time news for discounted utility. The thing that really determines, as Lucas has shown us, is not business cycle fluctuations, but growth. Now, growth, if you do indeed suppress growth as a result of this inadvertent, not so much inadvertent, but policy change where the interest rates fell, then that has a very deleterious effect on some present value of consumption. And in fact, this is a Pareto deterioration in this particular model. it's obvious that the savers would lose by the interest rates falling, because, of course, you earn less on your savings. But don't forget, it's a migration model where we're changing roles all the time here, admittedly, albeit slowly. What's intriguing is the investors. Also, their discounted utility. When I say discounted utility, I mean calculating it all through the complicated world of changing places and mark-off processes. So doing all that, figuring all that out, and then calculating the change in discounted utility. The investors as well can be worse off. In other words, it's, as I say, a greater deterioration to have lower interest rates. Now, this seems too strong, I have to say. Much too strong, because isn't it true that when the Bank of England lowers interest rates, that's good for the economy? And the answer is yes, it is, as long as the lowering of the interest rates is temporary. So here's the very, very artificial diagram where I'm assuming interest rates follow some exogenous dotted sine wave. And let's start at the bottom. As it drops down, interest rates fall. The impact on borrowing is positive. And importantly, it's more positive than the impact on housing prices. Why? Because house prices are determined by long-run interest rates, and the sine wave in the long run is, more or less average. So house prices in this simulation don't rise as much as B does. And the crucial difference is minus Q goes up, investment goes up, consumption goes up, output goes up. Contrast that, please, with a much longer sine wave, hugely long sine wave, where R is just sweeping down like this. Now, this long change, drop in interest rates, really affects Q big time. And look at the relative movements in B and Q here. Q goes up by more than B, or put it another way, B minus Q falls, so this net borrowing capacity worsens for you, this squeezed out of investment and output falls. So it's not a universal truth that low interest rates are bad for the economy, but what I would like to suggest is that permanently low interest rates might be bad for the economy, which is a sort of cautionary tale, dare I say, for quantitative easing. Two more things before I stop. One is to give you a clue as to what happens in the upper half of parameter space, where f is bigger than some critical value. And we think this is pretty interesting. What happens is that every new plant owner finds themselves on cusp of indifference between going for the long haul or going for the medium-term death. You are indifferent between staying forever. This is the dichotomy I was talking about before. Previously, in the previous proposition, everybody, all of you wanted to stay forever. And now, the opportunity cost of our buildings is high, Q is high, the temptation to liquidate is more serious, more attractive to you, and you find yourself indifferent between staying for long haul or go for the sort of make some money and get out strategy. Quick. Not that quick, but to get out in the medium term. Now, of course, if there's exit of the plant, but no exit of tools, then this one-to-one ratio in the economy is going to be lost. There'll be more tools than plant in the labour market for these high-powered engineers. And what will happen is the stayers will improve their productivity over time. So we're going to get a splitting. Although there's no deep heterogeneity here, the economy generates a whole myriad of plant-level productivity, which is true to life. There is a huge disparity in plant-level productivity, and I would like tentatively to put forward this as the beginnings of a theory of plant-level productivity determination. And behind it is this idea that plant owners have to choose between the strategy of either growing the plant, improving its productivity because you know you're in there for a long haul, or possibly allowing the productivity to shrink. So that's one final remark. This final remark is policy. This is not an Edinburgh equilibrium. This is not first best. And so the question is, can the government do anything about it? Is there any tax subsidy policy that would make things better? Well, the heart of the departure from Edinburgh is my inability to commit my labour. Remember that, the non-exclusivity constraint. So, bearing that in mind, it seems natural to assume that the government cannot tax my labour directly. So this is all theory talk here, but it's interesting. So if engineers, human capital, they can reinvent themselves, they can do a Donald Trump, they can go bankrupt and sell here anytime. So if it's true that engineers can behave like that, then I can't indirectly promise the government to pay taxes. That's a funny way of putting it, but just like I can't promise to you to work less than the ex-post wage W, I can't promise to pay taxes to the government. So I'm a hopeless target for taxation. But you, the plant owner, well, your plant screwed into the ground, it's in a building which is not mobile. So possibly then the government could tax you, paradoxically, so could tax your wage bill, let's say. So the government can't necessarily keep a handle on who's working for you. Black economy here. So the government can't keep tabs on that, but it can, let's say, keep tabs on how many people are working for you and how much you're paying them. If the government could tax wage bills and then use that money to subsidize investment, that would improve things. So the tax tower on payroll tax, which is then used by the government to subsidize new investment. And of course, anything that pushes up that denominator is going to be healthy because it's moving you back towards first best. But what's happening here is the government is acting like some collective bank of taking some of the ex-post yield that, as an individual borrower, I can't commit. But through doing via the payroll tax, and via the owners of the plant, with the right hand, the government's taking this money and then using it, so it's a perfectly budget balanced policy, using it to subsidize new investment on the other hand. So in a steady state, the government is taxing via the payroll the pre-existing investment and subsidizing new investment. Now, nobody's fooled by this. Everybody, you and I, all know exactly what the deal is here. But even having taken into account that you get taxed, your payroll gets taxed, and doing the appropriate pricing, it turns out that we can effect a greater improvement. So if there is something to be learned from this thought exercise, thought experiment, I think it's to try and get further under the skin of exactly how we are departing from the Edinburgh equilibrium. So I think these thought experiments about possible policies are not necessarily taken immediately to 11 Downing Street, to the new Chancellor. Is there a new Chancellor yet? We don't want to necessarily bring Mark something and say this is the solution to Britain's problems, but on the other hand, it does, I think, give some of the game away in terms of understanding how this economy is working, or more precisely, how it's not working, relative to first best. So that's all I want to say. Thank you very much indeed.